Uh, I mean, it's okay normally. I feel like I'm just very distracted this week. How are you doing?
Um, Same. It's just like one of those weeks where it feels like I don't even know what day it is.
Hmm.
Like I have no idea. I mean, like life's kind of getting back to like a normal sense of like a little bit more sense of normal. Like my practice, we're kind of being asked to come back into the office and like all of that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit more sense of like, oh, it's Tuesday. But even still, I'm like, I don't know. I
Hmm.
just don't know. But yeah, it's hard to get my feet underneath me in terms of time. Like, where am I? Um, and part of it, I think, is just like this week has felt super busy right out of the gates. I don't know if yours has been that way, but like mine has been just like incredibly busy.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think it's like you hit the ground running and you're just like in it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally fair.
What's your
Um,
distractibility?
I mean, work has been the same. We're nearing the end of the season for everything, like another week or two of this, and then we'll pause for the summer. But I've been very just like mentally fatigued and distracted over the course of the last couple of weeks. And it's like the news, and it's,
Mm,
like the nation is on fire, which is a very difficult thing that I feel like, because so we were originally planning on doing Bonfire of Destiny this week, and like if we get to it, we'll get to it this week, later on today. But I feel like Bonfire of America is the more sort of like proximate concern right now. Like everything is on
yeah.
fire, and everybody's like angry, and like I said, this has been weighing heavily on me for better part of a week, whatever it's been now. But like it actually really like sank in like a more immediate sort of way, if that's the best way to put it, yesterday. So like, today's Wednesday in real time. Yesterday was, Blackout Tuesday. People were posting like these kind of like black images, just kind of like squares, whatever, in solidarity with the protests that are around like George Floyd, and just kind of like the injustice that's really going on out there. And I posted it on my personal stuff, and I posted it on the work stuff too, on the Y2AM stuff. And on Facebook in particular, like people got really mad. Um,
At Y2AM stuff?
yeah. And it is the first time like people were like, I'm going to report this to the bishops. Whoever's in charge of this needs to like lose their job. And there were like clergy even who were like, this is why I'm never going to share Y2AM stuff with like my parish or my kids anymore. And
Mm,
it just made me think like, it's not scary. Like if I lose my job because I'm trying to in this like feeble sort of way show some solidarity with the family of
right, by
George
posting a
Floyd, and
black
like,
picture, a picture of a
right,
black box.
yeah, if I lose my job over that, like I'm okay with it. He wasn't fired for heresy, he wasn't fired for anything, he was fired for being a little bit upset that a police officer like knelt on this human being's neck and killed him. I'm okay with that. But it just makes me realize, like, as an American Orthodox Christian in particular, right? Like, this is just like stuff that's in the air, right? And I think like we can't help but need to like try to think about it or process it or talk about it, because I mean, for a variety of reasons, right? Like, this is where we are. Like, as Christians, we're called to be in the world but not of the world, and this is the world in which we find ourselves. Like, our world is now on fire. Like I said, this is kind of Bonfire of America. There's a lot of anger and a lot of fear and a lot of just heightened stressors, right? Which are kind of tearing us apart. Like, that's where we are. Um, and I think also on like a deeper theological level, like these questions of race, and these questions, they're fundamentally questions of anthropology. It seems to me like they're questions of what we believe humanity to be. And if we don't have a good anthropology as a church, like if we don't have a robust understanding of like who man is and is made in the image and likeness of God, like I don't think we can have a good Christology. I don't think we can have I don't think we can be like, in the same way that when Chrysostom was Bishop of Constantinople and he was upset about the way that the empress was exploiting the poor and so forth, and he gave these sermons, like they were ethical sermons that got him exiled. It wasn't like his theology that got him exiled. Like, these are the things that I think we have to at least try to think about and process as Orthodox Christians. So I don't know. That's why I felt like it was at least a start for a little while. We'll see where the conversation goes, but I thought like it was important to start here. With the caveat, right, that like what are we doing even talking about this? I suppose, you know, we're two white dudes who make silly YouTube videos and like talk about movies on a podcast. But like I said, like we're Orthodox Christians, we're Americans, we're a part of this community, you know, our local neighborhoods, like this nation. And I feel it's important to at least like try to think about it and process it and not pretend it's not happening. I don't know. This has really like been impacting me over the course of the last week or so. And I've been rambling. I don't know. Like, what do you think about what do you think about all this?
I don't know, man. Like I think it's just it's a lot to take in. I didn't really catch on to anything that was going on probably for at least a couple days into all of it. Because I'm not really on social media. I'm not on, you know what I mean? Like I don't really read the news. I don't watch the news. I don't have any real kind of awareness of a lot of things. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm playing catch up to like everything that's been going on. You know, I occasionally like will check the news app on my phone or whatever, but by and large, like, I don't know. I mean, I think what is confusing to me is that like the Christian could respond with anything besides grief, right? Like, I mean, and grief is a complex thing, right? There's like a lot of emotions that get tangled up in grief. So there can be anger and there can be like sadness, obviously, and confusion, right? Like, but I think that where I stand with a lot of it is my basic disposition toward a lot of things that I see in the world, and it's just like lament, you know, that like this is our world, and I sort of find myself kind of like in the, you know, in the shoes of the psalmist, and kind of think like, how long, oh Lord, you know, like how long do we have to do this? And of course, as a 9 on the Enneagram, I'm just like, why can't we all just do the things we're supposed to and be nice to each other? Like, why can't we stop being so mad at one another and just like love each other like we're supposed to?
Yeah.
Why is that so damn hard?
That's a great question. And it reminds me, right, to give this conversation a little bit of context, right? It reminds me of Rodney King's very famous, like, can't we all just get along in the 90s, right? Because we saw similar protests and like angry flare-ups in the 90s as a result of the, you know, the beating of Rodney King by the LAPD and like that whole trial, right? About 30 years ago. You go back 30 years before that in the 60s, you know, the same thing happened after the assassination of Reverend King. Like, so this is something that we've kind of like has been a generational problem, you know, like, it's not like this is the first, like, it's not like, you know, like the gif of the little girl that's like very, like, it's not like this is coming out of nowhere. Like, something similar happened 30 years ago. Something similar happened 30 years before that. Like, this is clearly something that's been in the air for generations, and has been a problem for generations. And like, we still haven't fully processed it or repented of it, right? Or even acknowledged it. You know, because there's for a little bit of catch up, right? Just even kind of like set the stage for the conversation. Because there's two things that seem to be like the flashpoint of everything happening out there, right? This is like Christian's little like news catch up. You've been giving us like bicycle corner the last couple of weeks. This is like the state of America corner.
Do we want to hear anything about the bikes this time? Do we care about the bikes right now?
I think the bikes are a palate cleanser. And every now and again, we might just need a little bit of lemon sorbet to just kind of like...
My bike is black.
Oh man, how are the bikes doing, by the way? Just before we get into the serious stuff.
They're good. They're you know, they're still in the shed. I did take a bike ride the other morning, and it was lovely.
Good.
Yeah, it was like kind of breezy a little bit and kind of cool because I was out at like 5:30 in the morning. So I just feeling the wind in my hair.
Would you say it's easy, breezy, beautiful?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I would say
Anywho, okay, that's good. That's good. I see you as a cover girl. Anyway, I'm glad the bikes are well. I'm glad there's some semblance of normalcy. But like, you know, the two things that were really the sparks, I think, for this latest round of protests was, you know, going back to May 25th. That's the day when George Floyd was very famously killed by a police officer in Minneapolis. An officer knelt on the back of his neck for almost 9 minutes, you know, 8 minutes, 46 seconds. The video was going around. I actually tried to watch the video just to sort of like confront this difficult thing. And I couldn't. I think I stopped after like 30 seconds, you know, because he's like shouting, please, and I can't breathe. And he's shouting for his mother. You know, he's shouting for these police officers to not kill him. And then 8 minutes and 46 seconds later, like he's loses consciousness or he's pronounced dead at the hospital later. You know, and that's launched all these protests. And this is like on camera, right? Like there's a police officer, there's a human being kneeling on the neck of another human being. And it's just like, it's being filmed and it's like, no big deal, which is crazy, right? This is like this lament. And then another thing that happened that day, which again kind of sets the stage for this here in New York, there was this guy who's a bird watcher, this guy, Christian Cooper, who I you know, looked into a little bit. Apparently, like he's like part of the Audubon Society, and he's done like interesting like comic writing and stuff. Like he just sounds like a really, really cool guy. He was bird watching in Central Park, something he's been doing since he was a kid. And a woman came, and there was a woman with a dog without a leash, and he asked the woman to leash her dog, which I think is a pretty reasonable request. And then she ended up calling the police and said something to the effect of this African-American man is threatening her life, which is interesting, right? The lie and why she kind of like phrases those things in those explicitly racial terms to try to like get the police to come and be her enforcer. But of course he was taking video and like this blew up as well because he wasn't being threatening. So you have these really interesting dynamics, and they're very different stories, right? Like, you know, one man had the cops called on him, but he's okay. And the woman who called the cops on him actually is the one who suffered some sort of reprisal, which even the guy himself, Christian Cooper, is like, I don't know that that's necessarily the solution. But then on that same day, George Floyd, you know, gets the life squeezed out of him. And, you know, the excuse, right, is like he was arrested earlier for apparently allegedly trying to use a counterfeit $20 bill, right? And that's kind of the justification. And then, as often happens when these extrajudicial killings happening, like you go back in time and it's like, oh, he, you know, shoplifted as a kid or whatever it is, as if like that justifies the death penalty, which is crazy. And so these protests have started, and like the protests have gotten heated. Like there's a certain irony to police forces using excessive force for protesters who are protesting the use of excessive force. And like there's looting and there's like that dimension to it as well. And it's just like everything is on fire. It's the Bonfire of America, like I said. So there's just kind of a lot going on. And I share this like sentiment of, you know, lament and just how long, our Lord.
You know, and I think like what's hard for me to know how to engage in this conversation, like, is just like to, you know, call out the elephant in the room. Like, is it just like, you know, like I'm a white dude and like have never experienced really like any level of oppression whatsoever, or any level of like fear just for, you know, walking down the street. And so I do feel a little out of my depth, and even beginning to like know like what to say in some ways, like, or, you know, anything of like, well, what's the right way to, I don't know, respond or feel. Like, you know, I mean, I'm half Hispanic, so I guess in some sense, like there's like some level of like minority or like, I don't know, thing going on in me, but I don't in any way identify with it, you know? So I definitely feel kind of like whatever I say here, I'm bound to fail. Whatever kind of conversation we have here is bound to fail. And yet at the same time, it's like, honestly, like, what shocks me a little bit in all of this is that people are surprised that people are upset. You know, like that there's some level of like, well, don't be so mad about it.
Yeah.
Like, what? You know, my one of my friends sent me a screenshot of a thing today that was about like this idea of privilege, right? Like what of the privilege of being white, and like there really is like this privilege that goes along with being white, that we are so blind to. And he says like white privilege kind of sounds like this, where, you know, I understand that it's terrible that like a black man was killed, but the destruction of property needs to stop, right? He said, I mean, that's what white privilege sounds like. He said, try reversing that. Like, I understand that it's terrible that property is being destroyed, but the killing of innocent black men has to stop.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that ultimately for me, I think is like, we're so backwards about our world, like the human, like the, you know, the value of a human life is like glanced over in a like with a but, right? You know, I understand that it's terrible that an innocent black man was killed, but it's like, no, like I've often said this with, you know, like my friend Katrina Batar, who runs the Yes program. Like one of the things that like she'll say, and that like I've since adopted in kind of speaking with young people, is that like it should piss us off that there are homeless people. Like we should be pissed off about that, that there are people who sleep on the streets. And we should be, I think, pissed off that like innocent people are being killed. It's like, I don't know. I don't know, man. It's just, it's so screwy. It's
Yeah.
also screwy.
I mean, for as Orthodox Christians, I think like it's very interesting that this is happening in the United States at the same time as we're having this like communion debate, like the spoon, not to spoon, right? Which is like fair. I think we can have like a, you know, clearly there's theological ramifications. Like, what are we actually saying about the body and blood of Christ, right? Like, I'm not saying that it's wrong for us to get heated, or, you know, as long as we're not cruel to each other, to get sort of emotionally invested in that sort of debate. But it is interesting that this is not the sort of debate that we're willing to get emotionally invested in, or we're willing to get emotionally invested in this, like, but what about the target that was burnt down, right? We're not angry about the human beings that are lying in the streets. We're angry about the shattered glass and so forth. You know, and I think back to St. John Chrysostom's words. There was like, you know, debates, as there still is sometimes, about the adornments in the church, you know, liturgical coverings, which are made of gold. Like, you know, is it hypocritical for Christians to do that? And, you know, I forget the specific way that he phrased it in one of his homilies, but it's like, you can't honor the body of Christ in this Eucharistic sense if your neighbor is lying in the street naked. You know, and he kind of goes through the Matthew 25, and he's like, it's like, it can't be either or. It's also not either or, it's both. And I wonder why we're not as invested in that piece of it. Why these things don't get us more angry. Because, like, again, I don't think you can have a good Christology without a good anthropology. And I think it's a bad anthropology. It's like a bad understanding of human life if, like you said, we're more concerned with the property than we are with the human beings that are like being objectified.
Yeah. Which, you know, what's, and what I feel like is hard, and what I don't know how to speak to, right, is kind of like the line between kind of the right level of like the right anger and right action, and kind of like, I'm so torn, man, because I don't endorse like looting and breaking things and setting things on fire, right? Like I'm not for that. And I'm definitely, most assuredly, not for like the killing of innocent people. And at the same time, I feel like it's getting increasingly impossible to deny that like the kind of stuff that we see is just like embedded in this in our system. That it's deep, you know, like it's in the DNA of America. The injustice and the inequality and the madness, right? Like, I mean, the American government was built on the backs of free labor and black slaves. Like it's impossible to deny that, right? Like in some sense, like free labor is the cornerstone of American life.
Yeah, I mean, the Washington Monument, very famously, right, was what construction of that was begun pre-Civil War in the 1840s with, you know, slave labor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are
Yep.
historical facts. They're uncomfortable historical facts, but
yes,
they're historical
yes.
facts.
And you know, it's funny. I was like listening to, because my wife and I we talked about this before, going through Father Alexis's The Bible in a Year.
Yeah.
Backed up till 2019, January 2019.
You will one day enter this terrible catastrophe of a year. Fear not.
Yes. Right now, everything's great. Back in January 2019, you know, like, honestly, the worst thing that happened recently was, let's see what happened in December of 2018. When did
was episode 9?
2017? No, that was December 2019.
Oh,
so
okay.
We're still waiting. We're still looking ahead. There's still a lot of hope for Star Wars: Rise of the Skywalker.
Oh, so the worst thing that had happened was like Solo wasn't as good as people hoped.
But that was May of 2018.
Yeah, but in the beginning of 2019, like that's the context of it.
Way past.
Oh, fair. Okay.
Happy New Year. The worst thing that happened is I stayed up too late. I don't even know what I was saying. Oh, so we've been listening through the scriptures, and right now we're at this place where like God has begun making this like covenant with Israel, right? Through Moses, the Mosaic covenant, the Sinai covenant. And there's all these just like wacky doodle laws, you know, that we're listening to, and we're like, huh? Like some of them totally make sense. And then other ones, you're just like, that's just, you would never ever hear anything like that, right? Like if a man seduces a woman who is a virgin and lays with her, then he owes her father the bride price. But if the dad doesn't want to sell the woman, then he still owes her the cost of like whatever, like, I don't know, that the run of the mill average virgin costs, like like whatever like the median cost on virgins that day is. You know,
it's like when you go to the sushi and it's like tuna market price. Yeah, it's just
exactly whatever the going rate for a virgin is those days, which is just like a very weird dynamic. But totally. Some of the commentary that he said afterwards, he's like, part of the reason that God is starting to make this like these covenants and give these laws and all of this kind of stuff is because these have been a people who have been in captivity. They've been a people who have lost their identity, who have forgotten who they are because they were subjected to this like other culture. And so like when somebody's enslaved, when somebody is in captivity, like they become a people that are not a people. Like they're not a people. And so there needs to be like some real, and what God is doing here is helping them begin to create this culture of like what it means to be the people of God, what it means to be Israel, what it means to be this nation, this holy priesthood, this chosen people, right? And I couldn't help but sort of like hear the parallels. And Father Alexis goes as far as to say like it takes centuries and centuries and centuries for that to happen, to reestablish that. And like I couldn't help but sort of hear that even in the context of what we're dealing with right now, right? That like,
yeah,
you know, the like the generational reality is that like America pulled a people away from their home and brought them into captivity.
Yeah.
And held them in captivity and took away their personhood. And now there's like this, I don't know, man, like the only reason that I feel entitled to say anything about anything is because like I don't have to fight for a platform. You know what I mean? Like, does that make any sense at all what I'm trying to say? Like I'm not having to rebuild anything or build something new. A home. Yeah.
What's
like,
the context?
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine, Chris, who was sharing exactly this sentiment, and why for him as an Orthodox Christian and, a black man, a husband, a father who's got, kids that he's raising in the context of all of this too. He's saying how hard it is. Like Steve, you're Greek. You kind of know where your parents came from. You know where your grandparents came from. You have your language, you have your dances, you have your foods, right? There's a context that you came out of, and you're at home in the church, right? And the church in a different sort of way is home. And sometimes he was saying as an Orthodox Christian, for him, he doesn't have that on a cultural level. And it's hard when he's trying to because he believes the church is the body of Christ. He believes the church is true, but when the church isn't, when his fellow brothers and sisters, right, don't act like brothers and sisters, and don't even the church becomes less home-like in a situation like that. I think it's no accident that the history of the civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement before that, is very much tied up in American Christianity, right? Because that, at the very least, is a home. You don't know where you're from because your great grandparents were brought here, and you don't know your ancestral language. You don't know what part of the continent of Africa you're from, whatever it is, but you're home in the church, and there's the spirituals that you can sing, and there's this identity, right? And it's heartbreaking because I've had conversations with Orthodox Christians who are black, and the difficulty of that sometimes, because they don't always feel that, especially in moments like this. But then on the flip side, right, of people who are so heartened that the Assembly of Bishops came out with a statement, so heartened that Archbishop Lepidoforos tweeted something very heartfelt and very eloquent, moved that we even put up that just Blackout Tuesday square. People were there, I'm an Orthodox Christian, I'm a youth worker, and I'm black, and I'm grateful for this, right? People who are just want this to be home.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like one of the greatest problems that I've wondered about for quite some time is and I don't know how to talk. I don't I feel like I just have nothing to say that's beneficial to this conversation whatsoever.
I hear that.
But trying to work through it is important, right? What distresses me is our attachment to America. Don't get me wrong, I think we should love our nation and pray for it and pray for the leaders and pray for whatever peace and stability in it. But we love our stuff. We love our Constitution. We love our department stores. We love our, political system. And we, in some sense, what I feel more and more what I'm seeing is people even love the division, which kills me. And what I'm trying to be really be intentional with my words in this, because I don't exactly know what I'm trying to say, but to defend those things as vehemently as people do, as vehemently as I see some Christians doing, I can't help but think we all just need a change of heart, big time. Where's the kingdom of God? You know what I mean? That's, I mean, we should be ready to get rid of anything that's not that. One of the things that I love about Kylo Ren is his desire to burn the past to the ground, right? Because I think there is something to what he sees in life, right? Like he, especially in The Last Jedi, he's like, let the past die, burn it to the ground. The Sith, the Jedi, forget it, forget all of it. And I think there's something to like, maybe that's sort of a actually Christian stance here, right? Like maybe we need to be like, we got to let whatever we think America is die. And like, maybe this is what these, even with the fire and the destruction and the whatever, like that's what we're kind of seeing happen a little bit, right? Like that whatever we've been attached to, our comfort, our whatever, our targets, our, and again, I'm not saying that like I support the burning down of it and like the destruction of things, and I support violence. Like I think these, obviously these things are evil, and we need to look at the evil in our own hearts and ask ourselves, why does this make me so mad? Why am I so mad about that instead of like the, again, it's that question of like, why am I emphasizing that instead of the like killing of innocent black men needs to stop? Like, why am I more presently concerned with things being destroyed rather than like icons being obliterated, living icons, breathing icons? You know, like I can't touch Christ at Target. I mean, he's everywhere, filling all things, but I'm probably not going to find him as easily in Super Smash Brothers as I am going to find him in like the face of my brother. And yet, we just want the protests to stop, to make them go away. And I think they need to get louder.
Yeah.
But not kill more humans in the process, right? Like if the whole thing is we need to value human life, like the violence of that is. But at the same time, what do you do when like nobody freaking listens to you? You know, like you think about like the people, or like what's this guy? What's the guy, the NFL player that kneeled?
Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah. See, I don't sports, so like that names are over my head, but I know it. That's the thing. Like we're all up in arms about that. It's like, what, you're damned if you protest quietly, you're damned if you protest loudly. And so like if no one's going to listen to you, you might as well like take the country out with you, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, there's
really
like
torn on this.
No, I think like, because again, I think there's a difference between condoning the violence and trying to understand where the violence is coming from. You know, because like Reverend King has this quote that's been bandied around, and I'm going to butcher it right now, but it's something like, a riot is the voice of protesters when nobody hears them. I'm totally butchering it. But like you said, like if a peaceful protest is not going to be heard, like what do you do as a people? And I think also like it's funny, there's a certain, I think about like as people critiquing the violence too, right? Because like on the one hand, yes, like well, there's a couple of layers to this, right? One is there's a difference between property damage and violence to human life. Like that, I think, is one of those principles we just have to like accept as a people. The looting of the store is not on the same level as like the killing of people, right? Like I think that's important. And I think we're drawing this equivalence, which is just not helpful and further marginalizes people, right? And further gives like, what else do you do, right? If this like people are not listening. It's also interesting, I think, as Americans, like I grew up celebrating the Boston Tea Party as a kid, right? Like the American colonists. So if you go back and you think about it, we ended up fighting a rebellion over a 5% stamp tax or whatever it was. And one of the things that we did, one of the early sparks of this rebellion, was we went and we got on a ship and we tossed these like tea overboard, right? We destroyed property.
Yes, Steve, but they were taxing white people.
and that's part of it, you know, and that's part of it. Cause like, here's another thing for like Orthodox Christians in particular that I've been thinking about. You know, on May 29th, right, 4 days after George Floyd was killed, it was the 560-something anniversary of the fall of Constantinople, right? Which like Greek people still mourn, but also Orthodox Christians like still mourn. And I think this gets to this question of like where our head's at, what we value, how we as Orthodox Christians provide leadership in this. Because we're still trapped by the memory of the fall of the empire, right? We're still like this is the thing that we are attached to, potentially even more than God's kingdom. We're sort of like attached to the kingdom of Byzantium, right? Let's be real. There are still people who long for the reconquest of that city, right? Like Greece in 1919 started a war after World War I finished to go and swoop up and pick up the pieces of the Ottoman Empire and like go and take Constantinople back. So like in terms of like violence and glorifying violence, like me, like as a Greek American, like this is what my people did at the beginning of the 20th century. The war did not go well for us. You know, this is the reason why like Greeks got kicked out of Asia Minor and so forth, the Smyrna disaster. It started with that war. But Orthodox Christians, even to this day, like circulate prophecies about like one day Constantinople will come back and yada, yada. Like we dream of invasion and violence, you know, like if we ever take Istanbul back, it's going to be a very bloody thing.
Yeah. It's not going to be like, you know, we just wanted you to have this. Can we have that, please?
You know, so it's interesting to me, like the question, the posture of violence, because like, because I think like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's just like,
yeah, but you're right. It's going to be bloody.
How anti-violence are we actually as people? Mm-hmm. You know, like, are we really anti-violence when we look at an officer? We can see it, right? 8 minutes, 46 seconds. We can see an officer slowly squeezing the life out of a man and be like, well, he passed a counterfeit $20 bill. Right? How anti-violence are we in a situation like that?
$20. By the way, let's have that for a second. Over $20. Who knows, like, even how he got that, by the way. Like, maybe someone else gave it to him, but it doesn't matter. Like, yeah. What the F? But you're right. I think it's like, are we against violence or are we against violence against us? I'm against violence unless it gets me what I want.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, like, this is one of the difficult things about this, right? Like, you compare the experience of the United States when it comes to our experience with slavery, with Jim Crow, right? You contrast that with the experience of, like, South Africa as they transitioned away from apartheid, with, like, the Truth and Reconciliation movement, being very honest about, like, what happened, who did what, right? Not sugarcoating anything. A man who was in jail suddenly becomes president of this new republic. I mean, like, again, it's not to say that anything is perfect, but like, it's interesting to contrast the way that, like, you know, Germany dealt with, you know, the post-Nazi era, the post-war era, like these condemnations of Nazi, like that was a terrible chapter. We take full responsibility for this. We commit ourselves to never doing it again. And America, right, where slavery falls, the Ku Klux Klan sort of like rises up, right? You get the civil rights era in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. Confederate monuments, like most of the Confederate monuments in the United States began going up as an opposition to the civil rights movement of like the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's when most of these statues and monuments went up. They're not like holdovers from the pre-Civil War era, right? Like we never owned up to it in a way that other nations owned up to it. We've never repented of it. Like we've never sort of like come to terms with the fact that, like, as a white dude, I can walk behind a woman, like on the street at night, and she's going to turn around and not clutch her purse because she sees my face, as opposed to one of my friends. I've seen it happen, right? Like when you walk into an elevator, right, and somebody sort of like gets scared. Like I've never intimidated anybody, and I have black friends of mine, like similar size, similar build. It's not like they're physically more imposing or anything, but there's one key difference. You know, I remember having this conversation with some buddies of mine. I was at a friend's apartment a couple years ago now, and I was the only white guy in the room. And it was like, what was it, like 7 or 8 of us all together, and we're just like hanging out, having some beers, just hanging out on a Friday night. And I told this story of one time I got pulled over, and I was really mad at this police officer because he said that I was using my cell phone, but it was in my pocket. I gave him the cell phone. He dialed it while it was in his hands, gave it back to me, and that was the justification for the ticket. And I was like, how dishonest, like terrible. And then each and every guy in the circle tells me this story of a time when they got pulled over for a traffic stop and a gun was pulled on them.
Whoa.
Like one of my friends, he told me that he was in the car with a high school mentor of his. He was maybe 15 or 16 years old. Here's this guy who's trying to be kind of like a father figure to mentor him. And he remembers very vividly the laser sights coming in through the window and these like red dots all over this mentor's face. And he's, 15 or 16 in the passenger seat next to him. Like I've never experienced that for a ticket.
Yeah.
I've like,
and you
I
never
have no
will.
Yeah, I have no problem asking to see the manager because I'm not going to be painted as that angry whatever. I have no problem like going up and asking a police officer for directions because I don't think it's going to be misinterpreted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to do with that, but I kind of feel like I need to be honest about that.
Yeah.
We need to be honest about that.
Yeah. And we need to be, I think, doing something about it. Like, I don't know what, again, like you said, I don't know what, but I feel like, one of the difficult things I think about even like social media stuff, like, and this just speaks to my like lack of understanding, but I don't really know what it accomplishes besides like sparking incendiary comments and like anger. Like I don't know what it officially does, and that goes for both sides of kind of situations, right? Like ultimately, like the Blackout Tuesday posts in question shows a level of solidarity, right, with like our brothers and sisters who are afflicted and suffering, who are angry, and like we can be angry with them. But like anger is ultimately got to be directed toward change, like towards something, right? Toward to the destruction of evil and the building of good. We talked about anger last time with Inside Out, right? Like it has a purpose. It's not a bad emotion. There's no such thing as a bad emotion. There's no such thing as a bad part of us. Yes, they can get extreme, but like anger has got to, it does something. It has to do something. It cares about, and that's even what they said in Inside Out, right? It cares about justice. It's very strong about justice, what's fair and what is unfair. And like, this is unfair. Like, I mean, if, like, I'm trying to think of even just like in levels of like, like men and women, because like I have 3 daughters. I'm trying to think like if ever there was like a dude that came into their life that somehow tried to like belittle them for whatever reason, I would be like, oh hell no, get out of my house. Or like you know what I mean? I would step in and like my anger would do something about it because of the injustice. Like there's something that needs to be done. It's not just enough to, post pictures of like, I don't know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg or whatever. Like,
Yes,
like
the
that's not
face
gonna,
of this movement.
right? Like, that's not gonna do anything. It might be like, look I care, but at the end of the day, like I need to put my hands and feet in action and do something, right? Or if like if someone was hurting one of my children, I would step in and do something. I would hurt them to keep them from hurting my daughters. That's what anger is supposed to do, And like, I don't know, man. I don't know what the right thing here is. And like, I don't think that obviously like I ever want to like be violent, right? Like I don't know. But things need to change. Like the system needs to be broken.
Yeah. I think, because I think if nothing else, right, these are the sorts of, I mean, at the end of the day, it's repentance. You know, I don't think there's going to be like a political fix. There's never a political fix. Like, we're never going to be able to immanentize the eschaton, as Bill Buckley once said. You know, we're never going to be able to sort of like make the kingdom of heaven manifest through political action.
Yeah.
You know, we're never going to be able to fully fix poverty. Like, we're never going to be able to do anything like that. It's not to say that there shouldn't be political pieces. Like, if the system is disordered and is creating bad results, as I think it is, like, something needs to be done. But I think also, like, yeah, this is where, you know, it's where the gospel comes into this. Like, again, I think there's no accident that the gospel was a piece of the abolitionist movement, the civil rights movement, sort of a motivating factor. Which is why I think it's important for Christians in particular to like say something at a time like this. Again, I don't know what we do. I mean, I have no sort of like positive plan or whatever it is. There's a reason I'm not running for president or anything like that. But it's hard. And I think like it's a gut check moment for all of us. Like, if we're more moved by the destruction of property than we are by the taking of human life, like, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If we're callous about any sort of human death, right? Whether it's the death of a protester or it's the death of a police officer. I mean, there have been a few examples of like current police officers and former police officers who have been injured and killed during the course of all of this, right? Like, we shouldn't be callous about that. Like, those are human beings made in the image of and likeness of God as well.
Yeah.
You know, that shouldn't be controversial either. You know, can we have a critique about, in terms of like the physical damage that's happening? Like, a lot of peaceful protests have become not peaceful because, you know, like, there's video of police SUVs like running over people. There's videos of like, you know, tanks coming in to, you know, like, there's videos of people being shot point blank range with like tear gas canisters, right? Which can kill you. I mean, if that hits you, like, it's non-lethal force, right? But is it when you're being shot in the head with it? I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point. But I feel like these are even deeper than political issues. They're like spiritual issues that we're dealing with, and we just haven't repented. I'll give you an example of this, because even to the Blackout Tuesday post, right? I didn't comment personally on anything. I just kind of watched a lot of the posts, but I did have one very kind of healthy online interaction yesterday on a friend's wall. A friend posted something, and I had a back and forth with a guy that I don't know in real life, but the friend of a friend. And it was like a very good and very civil and very wonderful conversation. But a lot of it, like, it became very academic at one point, and it was about like whether America has ever been a Christian nation. And the point that I was trying to say is like, I don't know, it was like legal to own human beings as property for a long time. How Christian can we really be in that case? And what does it matter if we call ourselves Christian if we still haven't repented of that? You know, it goes to your point about being invested in the idea of America. Like, I think this is one of the challenges that we have as Orthodox Christians here today, right? Like, fine, at some point we're going to move away from Greek Orthodoxy and Russian Orthodoxy and whatever, but American Orthodoxy in that way is not particularly more helpful if there's still something that we place above Christ and above the gospel. You know, an image of ourselves that prevents us from actually repenting and being humble and changing our lives and being open to the transformative power of God's grace. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, man. This is what I mean. Like, it's in some ways, like, I'm grateful that probably like a lot of this particular conversation has just had a lot of I don't knows and silence moments. Because at the end of the day, like, there really are no words to this. words are just words, right? Like there needs to be like action. Something needs to happen. Something needs to change first in me, and then in the world, right? I don't know. It's just such a large issue, such a large topic, such a large problem.
Yeah.
It makes me mad though.
Jenny has a comment in the chat, which is interesting. It ties what we're talking about to Bonfire of Destiny, which was theoretically today's topic, which we haven't gotten into. So without getting into that show particularly right now, the observation is, are we asking the right questions? Right. And I wonder sometimes, like, this is also one of the ways that the deck is sometimes stacked in politics. Like, are we asking the right questions? Are you against looting? Like, I don't know that that's necessarily the right question. Why does a community in our nation feel the need to do that? Maybe that's a more just like empathy building question. Like, why? What drives a person to smash a window in their own neighborhood? Leaving aside the agitators, right? Because like even the question of looting and rioting becomes complicated. Like there's all sorts of videos online of protesters turning rioters into police because they're undermining the message of the protests, right? Like that's even a complicated issue. But if it's a legit protester who's not there for some other sort of like political reason, but is just angry about this, is angry about having a gun pulled on them multiple times, is angry about having friends who've been choked out by police officers, like, I heard some stat because like George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis. There were like 44 times this year alone that a person was choked to the point of passing out by police in Minneapolis. Right. So, I mean, like, these are not, again, this is not like an exception, right? There's some sort of pattern of aggressive behavior. Why is that happening? Why is it that a person who looks like me just objectively feels, or subjectively, I guess, too, feels safer in the company of police? Like, why? I mean, talk about it at the very least, figure out what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, I think like you're right. Like and I do love that comment here that Jenny posted. It's a really good one. When in the show, the Bonfire of Destiny, like the whole kind of premise, right, is them like life after escaping this fire in Paris. But like as people are leaving this bazaar, the reality is that like the men trample, as she says here, literally trampled on the women to get out of the burning, and there's no repercussion whatsoever for those who have. I mean, at one point, that one guy like throws his fiance's best friend into the fire, and everyone's like, "Alice, you're crazy. Like he's a good man. Just forgive him, right? Like it's the anarchists that started the fire. It's not Julian's fault." But like, I love what she says here, right? That the question is not necessarily has to be reduced to like the whose fault is the fire, but like why was there no compassion or move to help each other escape in the first place? Like that, I mean, that is the deeper question, right? Of like what's in some sense like fundamentally broken in the human heart that we can't make this a conversation even now about like how can we make our country a safe place for everybody? Like how can we be compassionate toward all rather than like, well, the looters and the rioters, like they're responsible for the unrest here because of all of them is this, and like the looters and the rioters and even the protesters, like, well, it's the cops. So like the pointing of fingers across lines, party lines, like on the one hand, for the sake of justice, I think does need to occur. Right? We do need to say like, well, the people Because I think the issue with even with Bonfire of Destiny is like is questions of power. And what happens when you have power without virtue? Right? Like when power is centralized and localized and there's no virtue, there's going to be oppression and slavery and captivity and dominance and violence and shutting up people and tear gassing peaceful protesters so you can take a picture in front of a church with a Bible. Like there's going to be madness. It's just insanity. And so if you can't have power, but you can't like legislate virtue, right? Like you just can't do that. And so in some sense, I sort of feel like, well, then maybe the question becomes if you can't, have good leadership with power without virtue, you need to have virtue and power together. And you can't make that happen. Then maybe what you need to do is take power away from the people with power and give it kind of equally to all. And like that becomes one of the bigger issues that we have. Like, what would it be like then if we all had we all had power in some capacity? And I don't know what that means or looks like, but it makes sense to me then why people are trying to burn down the power. Because that's where like the trouble lives. You know what I mean? Like, am I making any sense at all?
100%. And I think there's a couple of layers for us here as Americans specifically, right? Because so much of our identity as Americans is wrapped up in the projection of power, right? I mean, like we have military bases like across the entire world. We're involved, and I've lost track of like how many conflicts we're sort of actively involved with at this point. Like that's what we do as Americans. Like we blow stuff up, right? We that's what we do. Perceived injustice is sort of like dealt with by force. So, there's something very American about this like instinct to turn to violence potentially too, right? And I was listening to a podcast earlier that was making a similar point about this too, and like hypothesized because, there are a lot of like peaceful protests that are being forcibly broken up, right? And kind of like one theory about this is how one of the things that happened in Minneapolis was the burning of that third police precinct, right? And this is like people who just kind of like are burned this center of power, and now there's this kind of like anxiety on the part of power to sort of like assert itself and kind of like lash back, which is only going to make things worse. And it's why there are so many documented examples of like peaceful protests where there's just kind of like this imposition of force, right? People who are not doing anything to any other human beings. They're being maybe aggressive with their words or whatever, but I don't know. You raised a really good point about what is power without virtue. What is power without virtue? There's like, this is a very kind of classical idea, like Plato, right? In the Republic, there's different ways to read the Republic. It can be an allegory for the soul, that whole sort of city. But one of the things that he says, right, is like it's the virtuous that are supposed to rule. It's like the philosopher king, and like, as we have become more and more of like an after virtue society, and more of a powerful society, right? Like that's a dangerous mix. Like we have bigger and badder guns, bigger and badder bombs, and less of a moral compass to use, like as a nation, both and individually, right? Like, what is our governing ethic as a people? I don't know. These are deep and different. And where does the church like fit into this? Like, how do we offer people like a compelling ethic? This is something we've talked about before too. Like we can see society as like post-Christian, which I think is pessimistic and unhelpful. Like, is there any possibility of us seeing society as pre-Christian? And this is like the sort of, this worship of power is like very pagan at its core. Like this is the sort of ground that is like ripe for the gospel, right? The fields are white for harvest. Or are we too interested in kind of like subtle in-house theological arguments rather than some sort of like more compelling witness to the world. I don't know. I don't know. This is like just a lot of thinking out loud. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, man.
I'm a little distracted by my washing machine, which is making noise. I don't know if you can hear it.
I can, yeah.
It's whirring.
Yeah, man. I don't know. I just kind of keep finding myself at a loss for words about all of this.
Yeah, I feel like if nothing else, again, I don't know how much there is left to say about this. I don't know if we want to get into Bonfire for the next 20 minutes, but I think that the thing that kind of like is just coming to the fore of my heart about all of this is like, we don't know. This is the sort of thing that like we should offer to God and just pray over. Because again, I don't think this is a question of plans or strategies or whatever. Like, sure, like if there are systemic things that are wrong in this country, they do need to be fixed. But I think this is there's a spiritual thing going on here as well. And it occurs to me like there's something stark about the contrast of buildings on fire in the United States as we're preparing for the Sunday of Pentecost, you know, and for the descent of the Holy Spirit in tongues of flame. Like, these are very, there's fires that are raging, right? But that's not the fire that's raging. I don't know.
I think that like what, you know, grinds my gears kind of with whatever like response that we can have is I feel like we can like as Christians, no matter what the issue is, just like kind of emphasize like the just like the kind of like the more spiritual aspects of the gospel, right? Like prayer and fasting and education and like retreats and Sunday school and like I just feel like we miss out on the reality that like the gospel has to have practical application as well. Like it needs to like I'm getting to a point where I feel internally like I can't talk about this without swearing. So if I drop it, I'm sorry. But like it just gets me so mad that, you know, that like
We'll bleep it out in post.
it should be fine. I love those little beeps. But I like I felt it come out and I was like, oh, there it is. The like the practical applications of the gospel, like like Jesus is not just simply, I mean, he absolutely is talking about like a revolution of the heart, right? Like he 100% is talking about the heart being changed. And he also says that that's going to have some real freaking consequences in life, right? Like to the point where people are going to kill people over it, right? Like people are going to kill they're going to make martyrs of you because of how you actually present in the world and like the kinds of things that you do and the kinds of, you know, nobody ever got martyred for going on a weekend retreat, right? I'm going to just go spend some time in the cabin and pray in solitude. Like what it is it's speaking to systems in place. And, you know, it's St. Basil the Great being like, if you have two pairs of shoes and one is you wear and one you don't, like you're stealing, which means like you have to go do something about that, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that like pisses people off to hear. Like I don't like Basil. Father Basil is like, what
A little extreme.
Jerk. Yeah, what a jerk. Exactly. Like doesn't he know that like we have to, I don't know. we just show up to church to like feel better about ourselves and whatever. Like the call has to be like, we have to actually understand that like the gospel needs to have some real world consequence, right? When you look in Acts, you know, the community of Acts in the New Testament, like they're doing stuff. They're present in a way, like they, you know, Peter and John go to the temple and they can't stop preaching Jesus, so they get arrested, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, like they ordained deacons to like distribute food. Like there's actually something that needs to happen in the world. Like Christianity is a joke if it doesn't make people's lives better.
Or you're
right?
different at the very least.
Different. Yeah. And I like, yeah, better.
And
like it has to be better.
yeah. Well,
I don't
and
know
I think
about
this is,
necessarily what I mean in terms of like worldly thing, like richer or whatever like that, but like,
yeah, but elevated. You know, I think this is, you know, Saint Athanasius, however you pronounce it, on the Incarnation, right, is this kind of very classical little treatise on, you know, why the Son of God took on flesh. And later in the book, like he talks about, you know, how do we know, right? How do we know that Jesus is Lord? How do we know that this Jesus, this carpenter from Nazareth, is actually the Son of God? And he points to Christians. And he's not the only father to do this, right? He's like, I'm not going to make arguments to you. Like, look at the people who are members of his body who now show contempt for death in the actions of their lives. Like, they don't hoard food like others who are afraid of death. They give food away to the stranger. They don't hoard their cloaks. They give their cloaks away to those who are cold. They preach the gospel at great risk for their own lives because they're not afraid of the beatings and the scourgings and so forth. Like, these are people who have actually trampled down upon death alongside their Lord. And like, that's why they're different. And, you know, and that's a question for us as Christians. Like, if people look at us, right, like, is there anything different about us? Or are we just kind of like consumeristic Americans that are comfortable and kind of value our comfort and value our privilege and value our commerce and value, right?
Yeah. My friend just sent me something interesting that I want to share from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he wrote a letter from a Birmingham jail that says, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. The Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
That's a lot to take in. Like this, in other words, right? Like any kind of just like moderate, like, well, it's all just like calm down and like whatever, right? Like he's saying like that's more damaging than even people who are doing like the burning of crosses and the burning of things like that's gonna push us closer to freedom. I think probably because it's so clearly not right.
Yeah.
So and my friend also said like that, and I think that this is a reality, like that and I think like what the problem with privilege is, and I think this is what I'm trying to articulate, is that it stands aloof and criticizes things that it doesn't understand instead of getting its hands dirty and trying to actively be a part of creating a solution, right? Like getting in there and like being okay with the fact that like, if we're going to, again, I almost swore, but I caught myself. If we're going to do anything, then like we got to let the past die. We got to burn it in the ground a little bit here. Right. We got to, and in some cases now it seems like that's literally what's happening, but like things need to be burnt down. We need to get like all in instead of just standing out here. Like privilege is what allows us to stand on the outside and say like, these people should stop.
Yeah. Because
what
does
bothering
that mean?
me.
because what does that mean, right? Like if the argument here is just like, stop looting, which again is bad, it's not about defending it, right? But if that's kind of the plane of the debate, all we're really saying is like, let's go back to the time on May 25th when a police officer felt comfortable in kneeling on a human being's neck on camera, but at least like, the local Target or whatever was still, I don't mean to pick on Target, but just keep the example that keeps coming to mind. Right. That's what that is functionally, right? Like, whoa, stop. You shouldn't be doing that. Right. Let's rewind the clock a week and a half and go back there. And we're okay being there because at least I feel safe.
Yeah.
Right. The human being on the ground with a knee on the back of his neck doesn't feel safe. The generations upon generations of people who have guns drawn on them like constantly, who can't even walk into a room without people tensing up as if there's some sort of threat. They've never felt safe. Right. But I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about like this threat to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That said, I don't want anyone more to get hurt or things to burn down. I don't want that. And I would much rather things burn down and then things never change.
And that's the point, right? Like maybe things would stop burning if we actually listened as a society.
We did something. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, we got to get our hands dirty. And I don't know what that means or what that looks like, but like the reality is like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. Like things are fucked up. They are. Like, and we just like, we got to recognize that and we got to call that what it is. And we got to look at the world and say like this, like we have fucked this whole thing up and like something needs to change. And like, I can't emphasize enough, like my feelings on that. Right. Like we, as a church, like we can't just simply like issue like stances. Like we firmly are against racism. Well, like prove it. Otherwise, like we're just like, according to, MLK, like we're the problem then. He'd rather face the Ku Klux Klan than like a church that doesn't give a shit. Really? I don't know, man. I don't know. Sorry, I swore.
You're making my job hard. I'm gonna have to edit this out in post.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, I think like.
But let's call it what it is. You know what I mean? Like let's. Why do we have to be bashful about that?
Yeah.
Like, one of the few things that I've really loved about like Martin Luther. This is like the one thing that I really like about Luther. There's maybe two things, but like one thing, here it is. You're gonna have to edit this out too. This is gonna get you in a lot of trouble. But like
more than the cursing, probably in some circles.
Probably, and you know what? That's fine. But like his whole thing, right, is this emphasis on what he calls the theology of the cross, right? The theology of the cross, rather than this like theology of glory, because that's kind of like what he's like responding to, right? Is the theology of the cross is what, and he says, the theology of the cross calls a thing what it is. And I think that is so important, right? That like, if we're going to be people of the cross, we need to be able to call things what they are. Call a spade, call racism, racism.
Call what's unacceptable, unacceptable.
Exactly. And not be bashful about it. Why are we so bashful?
Yeah.
Like again, if we're going to be truly Christian and bear have a prophetic voice, like we're going to piss people off. People didn't like the prophets. That's why they killed them all. And I don't think we need to be disrespectful or demeaning or like whatever, but like, let's call a thing what it is. Like what? This certainly doesn't please the Lord.
Yeah.
If we're going to like speak in hushed tones about evil, And then like, I don't know, man.
No, because
There's this great, since I'm already swearing, I'll go for it, whatever. But like, there's this great thing that, so Tony Campolo, I don't know if you know who Tony Campolo is, but he is a Protestant minister who is very involved in social justice things, like has been historically, right? And he's also just kind of an edgy dude. And he came to my alma mater, Wheaton College, once upon a time. And he's done this in several other places. And he goes, last night in Chicago, like, oh man, I'm going to totally screw this up. Last night in Chicago, 40,000 people spent the night sleeping on the street. And what's even worse is that none of you give a shit about that. And the reason I know that is because you're more upset that I just said the word shit in chapel than you were upset about the fact that 40,000 people slept on the street last night. Like that bothered you more. There was more shock when I did that than there was when I said 40,000 human beings slept on the streets last night. Like that to me is prophetic. It's prophetic to be able to say like, we got to do something. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that we can't just say that it's unacceptable. We need to like do something. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm done. I don't know what I'm saying anymore.
you don't have to apologize for anything.
I apologize for swearing and for making your job harder.
But that's part of, see, this connects with what we were talking about last week, right? This is what happens like to the virtuous soul, which is not feeling negative emotions, but is feeling them in the right sort of way. Like, again, anger is nothing to be afraid of, but like we should be angry about the right things.
Mm-hmm.
And it is to our discredit that we're not angry about those things. Cause like, I'll admit that too. Like I'm more intellectually upset about certain things than I am kind of like viscerally upset about things. You know, I'm more upset emotionally. I'm more emotionally invested in my own comfort and my own whatever than I am about that statistic, right? Even because again, it computes with me as a statistic. You know, I'm more intellectually upset about some of the difficulties, right, that Black people in this country have been dealing with for a long time. I'm more emotionally invested when like I hear it from the mouth of like a friend or somebody I care about, right? But like that's part of like my lack of formation. I'm selfish, right? But like I think like that's where telling the truth is so like you can't repent if you don't admit that things are wrong, right? Because even if you're not at that point, even if you're not at the point where you're angry that there's people who are sleeping on the street, that there's people who are being choked out, whatever it is, like we at least have to own the fact that we're not upset about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Let's call it what it is. Again, we got to call it like that's the theology of the cross, right? Like, and I agree with that. I think Luther was right when he said that. Like, if you aren't having a particular response or reaction, like, say that too. Don't fake it till you make it or whatever. You're right.
Yeah. Call it what it is, and call me what I am.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm more upset about windows being broken than actual human beings being killed, like that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also okay to say like, you know, part of the reason that I am upset about that is just because I'm scared. Like it's scary. The fact that things are being like broken up again, this is where like the emotions are important to understand, right? Like why am I angry? Well, ultimately because I'm afraid. You know, like I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my life. You know, like I'm afraid is my neighborhood safe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
And it's okay to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully like that fear is the thing that you can unite us with other people who fear that fear too.
Yeah.
You know, if I've been afraid the last couple of weeks because there's looting going on in my city, like what about people who are afraid in their neighborhoods, like night after night, month after month, year after year?
Amen. God help us, man.
Yeah.
How long? This is shaking us out of our comfort. That's for sure. All of this, the last 2 months I feel like have been, I said it like at the very beginning of the COVID thing, right? Like, this is a time for smashing idols. This is what God has given us this thing for, and like, we didn't get it with the pandemic. We didn't hear it. And now he's like, okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and start burning things down. Like fire from heaven, right? Like, and this is interesting again too, to like, you to even bring it back to Pentecost in some ways. And you look through, right, like especially like Exodus and even like the beginning of Ezekiel, and you look at the transfiguration, like these theophanic moments of God appearing happen with fire and smoke, right? God leads his people in fire. And like, I wonder, like maybe in some sense, can we look at even like the fact that America is on fire and be like, holy crap, like, is this God? Is he there? Is he in the flames? Is he in these flames? I'm not saying that like he's like, yeah, burn down Target, but like, is he in there somewhere? And if we're just trying to make it stop, God is a consuming fire. Like, I don't know, man. Like, are we missing something if we just try to shut it up?
Are we hearing, to maybe even like take a different angle, right? It's after Cain kills Abel, right? And you have that bit in scripture where like his blood is sort of crying from the earth, right? Like, if nothing else, maybe that's what's happening. Like the blood of all of these people that have been unjustly arrested and unjustly choked out and unjustly killed and are continuing to be justly killed. Like, they're, at some point the soil is wet, right? And like all of this blood is crying out. And I'm sure the Lord hears it, right? But I don't know that we hear it necessarily. This pain is almost like a sacrifice, like even linking it to a fire in a different sort of way. Like all of this injustice, all of this weight that human beings have been bearing on their shoulders for so long. Patiently.
Mm-hmm.
Patiently. There's who is it? Plutarch, I think. It's really interesting. I can't remember who it is. One of the classical historians. He talks about, the Spartans in ancient Greece had slaves. They had the helots. They had this city-state that they defeated in a war so aggressively that they actually took them over. And like, it totally changed Spartan society, because it's like, oh my goodness, we actually didn't just win a battlefield, we won this people. And then they have the helots, who are basically their agricultural slaves. And that's when Sparta becomes like this militaristic society, whatever. And one of the chroniclers, he writes some point like, the helots hated the Spartans so much that if they ever got their freedom, they would all rise up and tear the Spartans apart with their teeth. Right? Like this oppressed people, if they ever got their freedom, that's what they would do to the Spartans. And it is so interesting to me that after centuries of slavery, after centuries of Jim Crow, after centuries of all this sort of stuff, like, what are we seeing? We're seeing some glass being smashed. Like, even to frame the God, like there were people who were property and then were not. There were people who were, even when they were not property anymore, were still sort of like ground down by this system that refused to fully see them as human beings. And they sang spirituals, and they marched, and they sat at lunch counters, and they knelt. And like right now at this present moment, like, yeah, some of them are breaking some glass and whatever, but I can't help but think about this question of injustice in the United States, like framed against that. Like, the helots would tear the Spartans apart with their teeth. Like, I don't think we're at risk of anything like that. And that to me is like is such a mark of like spiritual fortitude of a people that have borne so much and have cried out for justice for so long, and we haven't heard them for so long.
Yeah. And I keep coming back to what my friend kind of said here, right? That like the job is not to criticize what we don't understand, but to actively participate in a solution, not just kind of show solidarity here and there, but to like be like, okay, so this isn't working. Like, obviously this isn't working. We need to take this as a time to like step in, get our hands dirty, you know, and if that means like cleaning up some broken glass, so be it, you know. But I don't know that shutting it up is the gets us anywhere. Just quieting the people who are causing unrest. Like, maybe we need to stop resting ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a white dude.
I don't know either. I'm just a white dude with a Star Wars shirt on.
You're wearing a Star Wars shirt?
I'm actually wearing a Rebel shirt.
I am wearing a Star Wars shirt.
That's why we're friends. And we can at the very least have a very uncomfortable conversation.
Right.
If nothing else.
And also, like, not really for us, though, because, like, we're not implicated in it in any real way. Like, I want to, like, I want to own that, too. You know? Like, this, like, my life is pretty, like, fine still.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm speaking about having this uncomfortable conversation from a position of comfort. And that's, like, that, even that is confusing and frustrating for me.
Mm.
You know? And there's guilt that goes along with that, and some shame, too, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. It's weird. God help us.
God help us. God help us and open our hearts to each other and open our hearts to him. And may the flame of the Holy Spirit, rather than the flame of violence, overtake us at some point. So what'd you think about Bonfire of Destiny?
It was okay.
That's, yeah, basically. It was all right. Some good cinematography. That was about it.
Yeah. There were some moments that were good. I mean, I definitely was curious to see like how it was all going to turn out. But, you know, when I watch a show and binge a show, like usually I find myself kind of like, oh, I can't wait to get to tonight so I can watch it. But I never felt that way with the show. I was kind of always like, well, I guess we can watch the next episode.
Yeah.
But what I did like, you know, which we kind of talked about a little bit, was especially like the questions of power. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic. You know, and Jenny basically in her comment said what I was going to say probably in our conversation of like, what the heck? Where were the men?
Yeah. Yeah. There was that as a theme, and there was the character of Tomas, the little boy, who was like the best part of that show.
Oh, he was so cute.
He was super cute.
That's
anyway,
all that I could say every time he came on screen. I was just like, oh, he's so cute. Look at him.
Wish to take this. Yeah, just pinch his cheeks.
And also, can we just talk about the fact that when Rose's face was burned, like, she was clearly not Odette. Like, she still looks like Rose. She's still clearly.
Look, this is a conversation we've been having since Clark Kent and Superman. Right? It's like, oh, there's no curl in his hair, and he's wearing these like tortoise shell glasses. Clearly, he's no longer Kal-El. He's just Clark.
Mild-mannered Clark Kent.
Yeah.
My name's Clark.
Doing his best impression of a human.
I know, which is really kind of insulting.
I know. Superman is super condescending.
Which is also hilarious to me on one level, because I have had some British friends in the past.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. But I mean, in reality, like, we don't talk anymore. But one in particular in college, we were just like, hey, can you like try to talk just like with an American accent? You know, like speak with an American accent. And every time he did, it always came out like this. Like he thought that like this is like the typical American accent. It's like a deep kind of Southern. And we were like, what? Who do you know that talks like that? Like nobody talks like that. Connor's from Texas and he doesn't talk like that.
That's amazing.
What the heck, Ben?
Yeah, Ben, if you're watching.
But it was just hilarious. It was always hilarious because he's like, well, you know, cowboy movies and stuff. Like, that's it? That's like your idea of America?
I mean, reasonable, I guess.
It was very funny. Well,
what are we doing next week? Since, you know, next week we'll spend more time on whatever we're doing next week.
Ay caramba. What did
Our
we talk about?
penultimate episode of the season. We've got 2 left.
We're ending with The Chosen, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And next week
Maleficent?
is Maleficent. Yes.
Maleficent. Okay.
Mistress of Evil. Directress of Evil?
Directrix. Yes, Directrix of Evil. Editor, editrix.
I don't even know. Yes.
Mistrix.
Mediatrix. Mediatrix of Evil.
Yeah, so we will do that next week.
Unless something else happens, probably. Because who knows anymore? Yeah. I don't know what. Maybe like there won't even be an America next week. Who knows?
Oh, I am gonna be so upset if I go back to edit this podcast and they're like, well, oh no. Haziel says 2020 is the best season of Black Mirror so far. Ugh. Yeah, and now we're in June, episode 6.
Have mercy.
Yeah, remember the Murder Hornet teaser? Like, I thought that was going to be an episode. Not really.
Oh, the Murder Hornets.
Remember when Australia was on fire for a hot second?
Dude, what a weird year. This is some Mayan calendar stuff.
Yeah, I think we forgot to carry the 2. It was 2020, not 2000. Calendar.
It's so funny because in all the video games, 2020 was like the year of hope and promise.
Yeah, like Perfect Vision.
Yeah. See? There you go. Perfect symmetry, perfect all of it. But now this. Man, we got to play some baseball 2020 with robots and cyborgs and launch pads to help you catch pop flies.
Bunt. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for having this hard conversation, man.
Yeah.
And thanks you guys for being here and you guys for watching on the YouTubes and listening on the podcasts. Let us hope that things are better when we come again next Wednesday.
I mean,
have a happy Pentecost, everybody.
Peace.